The earth is cold against her cheek, so cold it feels like it's crawling into her bones. She can't see much at first, only the smear of torchlight trembling across the packed dirt, the shadows jittering and stretching like broken limbs along the stone walls. Her breath comes in shallow bursts, each one clouding the air with a faint mist that hovers and then dissolves. The coarse fabric at her wrists scratches her skin where the rope binds her fibers, digging deeper each time she trembles. A faint metallic creak echoes somewhere behind her. She freezes. The sound is too deliberate, too calm to be anything but them. Her fingers curl reflexively, fingertips brushing the dust beneath her cold gritty, mixed with something damp. Her pulse stutters as she lifts her head just enough to see the edge of a sandal toe emerge into the wavering light. Leather straps, hardened soles, the emblem carved along the ankle, simple, severe. Spartan. She tries not to breathe too loudly. Above her, the roof of the dim chamber disappears into darkness. Smoke from the torches hangs low, drifting in a slow, oppressive veil that catches in her throat. She coughs once softly, but even that small sound feels dangerous. Her body folds inward from the taste, bitter a mix of burnt oil and old wood. Voices murmur near the entrance, low, controlled. They never shout. That would break the illusion that everything here is orderly. A shadow moves. Boots scrape lightly on gravel. She turns her head just enough to see them, two Spartan overseers, their silhouettes rigid and angular. One leans slightly, adjusting the torch mounted on the wall, causing the flame to flare and throw a harsh bloom of orange across the room. For a moment, the light lands on her fully, her cheeks smeared with dirt, a strand of dark hair stuck to her skin by sweat. Her eyes wide, though she fights to keep them neutral. She's not supposed to look afraid. Helot women are supposed to bow their heads, keep their breathing steady, show no defiance. Fear's permitted only in silence. But her hands shake. She can't help it. The overseer closest to her steps forward, his shadow swallowing the torchlight as he approaches. The soft creak of his leather cuirass sounds almost intimate in the stillness, like whispering. His fingers tighten around a wooden staff, polished smooth, scarred by years of use. She knows its weight. She knows the sound it makes when it strikes the floor. She knows the quiet discipline required to wield it. Her heartbeat thrums at the edge of her hearing. She swallows the motion barely visible. Another set of footsteps approaches, lighter, quicker, almost nervous. She glimpses a young Spartan boy, no older than 13, his hair cropped short, his eyes sharp but uncertain. He carries nothing in his hands, yet his posture strains with expectation. He avoids looking at her directly, staring instead at the ground, then at the overseers, then at the far wall, as if the stones might offer guidance. A ritual, she realizes. This is a ritual, not one spoken aloud, not one written, but one practiced until it has become as silent and inevitable as the dawn. The older overseer lifts her chin with two fingers, calloused cold, forcing her to look up. The sudden brightness of the torch stabs her eyes, and she blinks, her lashes damp. His expression is unreadable, carved from the same unforgiving stone that walls them in. He turns her face slightly, examining it, as though inspecting an object. Her lips part without sound. His gaze flicks to the boy. A lesson, then. Her stomach tightens. A gust of night air slips through a crack in the stone doorway, carrying with it the smell of distant rain, wet soil, pine resin. It brushes her face gently, such a fragile human sensation that it almost breaks her. She closes her eyes for a heartbeat, remembering her daughter's small fingers tracing patterns on her palm just 2 nights before. Remembering the hum of evening insects in the fields, remembering warmth. The overseer's hand drops away. The boy steps forward. His breath is unsteady, but he tries to mask it the way he has been taught. His shadow trembles across her knees. She feels the shift of the air as he reaches toward the staff the overseer now offers him. The wood makes a faint, dry sound as it passes between their hands. She forces her own breathing to slow. 1 inhale, 1 exhale. She opens her eyes and sees something in the boy's expression, a flicker of hesitation, or perhaps recognition. It's gone in an instant, swallowed by duty. The other overseer moves behind her. His sandals grind softly through the dirt. She feels him crouch, fingers brushing the rope at her wrists, tightening it, not much, just enough to make the restraints bite deeper. The boy lifts the staff. Her pulse roars in her ears. Torchlight flares. The overseer's hand rests on the boy's shoulder. A signal. He raises the staff higher. Her breath catches. The room holds its silence. And then, darkness swallows the scene as a single sharp command echoes off the stone. Begin. The darkness settles, and with it comes a different kind of silence, one not born from fear inside a Spartan chamber, but from the weight of what history has refused to carry forward. A low, measured voice breaks through, steady as a scholar's hand brushing dust from an ancient tablet. For centuries, he says, Sparta has been remembered through polished marble myths, tales of iron discipline, unbreakable warriors, and a society forged in the fires of austerity. Yet beneath those stories lies a deeper stratum of truth, one buried, intentionally pressed down under layers of state censorship, destroyed records, and official silence. The Helots, those who fed Sparta, labored for Sparta, suffered, for Sparta left almost nothing in their own words. What survives of their world clings to the edges of other people's writings, fragments, slanted reports, dismissive lines carved into stone by those who owned their bodies. But the women, the Helot women, are nearly invisible. Their lives erased, their suffering omitted, their voices sealed away so completely that even the shadows hesitate to speak for them. Tonight, the narrator continues. We step into the spaces the Spartans tried to close forever. We investigate the hidden corners of their society where law, ritual, and violence converged in acts so calculated, so quiet, that even rival Greek states whispered about them only in caution. This is not a retelling of familiar battles or heroic deaths. This is an excavation, a recovery of what the ancient world was never meant to preserve. What the Spartans did to Helot women, he says, was not an accident of cruelty. It was a system codified, sanctioned, and methodically concealed. And now we unseal it. The narrator's voice deepens as though descending through centuries of dust and stone, guiding the viewer into the architecture of a society engineered for domination. Sparta, he begins, did not simply conquer the Helots. It reshaped every breath they took. In the red dawns that rose over the Eurotas Valley, mist hanging low over the reeds, Spartan warriors marched in rigid formations, bronze shields catching the early light like cold suns. Their footsteps beat against the earth in perfect rhythm, the sound carrying across the fields where Helot women bent under the weight of harvested grain. One world defined by iron discipline, the other by enforced silence. To understand what would later unfold in secret chambers and torchlit corridors in the thresholds between law and violence, we must first understand the systems that gave those acts their terrible legitimacy. The Helots were not slaves in the common sense, the narrator explains. They were a conquered population, Messenian, Laconian, reduced to hereditary subjugation. Their labor fed the Spartan state, allowing every Spartan male to train without distraction. Yet Sparta feared them, needed them, despised them. And it was in this strange, brittle triangle dependency, hatred, terror, that the suffering of Helot women took root. A fragment of a much later chronicle, battered and scorched along one edge, is displayed. The narrator reads its faded inscription slowly, the syllables rough. They feared the Helots most of all their women, for they bore the generations. The line trembles with implication. In a dimly lit reconstruction of ancient Sparta, smoke from hearth fires clings to the beams of small Helot huts. Crude wood-patched roofs, the smell of earth and damp straw lingering in every corner. Inside, women grind barley, mend coarse linen, soothe children who cry from hunger, all while listening for distant footsteps, the scrape of sandals, the thud of spear butts tapping the ground. Those sounds could mean a tax collector, a patrol, a punishment, or far worse. Fear permeated everything. It crept through the cracks in the walls. It settled in the breath of mothers as they pressed their infants closer, telling them in whispered lullabies never to speak too loudly, never to linger in the open, never to draw a Spartan's eye longer than a heartbeat. Sparta's laws, written and unwritten, served a singular mission: ensured total control. One decree preserved only in the later writings of a suspicious Athenian observer describes the infamous Krypteia. Spartan youth selected for ruthlessness roamed the countryside at night, killing Helots deemed too strong, too numerous, or simply too confident. The killing was not the worst part, the narrator notes quietly. It was the unpredictability, the silence. The way the attacks arrived like sudden storms, leaving behind the metallic smell of blood soaking into the soil. And always the Helot women were caught in the aftermath. Mourning husbands, brothers, sons, while knowing their tears must fall quietly with heads bowed, lest they be punished for grieving too boldly. But physical violence was not the core of the system. Control of reproduction was. The narrator's tone sharpens the air around his words, tightening like rope pulled taut. Sparta's survival depended on maintaining a rigid population balance. Spartans themselves were few, never enough to meet their own ambitions. Each Spartan warrior represented years of training, state investment, and cultural expectation. Meanwhile, the Helots outnumbered them dramatically. This imbalance produced a chilling logic. Helot women became the battlefield on which population policy was waged. Ancient writers hint at arranged unions between select Helot women and chosen Spartan youths, described only in vague euphemistic language. Archaeologists have unearthed tablets with coded references, tiny scratches that align with older Dorian dialects, suggesting that certain councils of elders oversaw these pairings. The purpose was never stated outright, but the intent bleeds through every surviving fragment. Sparta needed more laborers, more bodies bound to the land, more children with strong limbs destined for servitude. A Helot woman named Kleio, mentioned only once in a minor Peloponnesian manuscript, appears briefly in the beam of the narrator's attention. Her name means blossom, a tragic contrast to the life she lived. The text describes her as small in frame, with eyes that avoided the horizon. It records that she bore 5 children by the time she was 22. None were fathered by her Helot husband. He had disappeared during a harvest inspection years earlier. Kleio's story is one of thousands her voice carried through time, not by her own words, but through the reluctant testimony of an outsider who likely never met her. Spartan paranoia intensified her suffering. Every political shift, every military campaign, every rumor of Helot unrest tightened the invisible noose around women like her. Ephors issued decrees with clipped, emotionless phrasing that masked violence in the politeness of administration. One fragment reads, "Population stability must be enforced without disturbance to order." Another, "Compliance ensures the harmony of the state." The narrator lets the lines hang in the air, their meaning settling heavily. The Spartan worldview, forged in rigorous discipline and constant threat of war, saw the Helots not as humans, but as a potential uprising waiting to ignite. Women, by bearing the next generation, became both the perpetuators of labor and the potential source of revolution. Thus their bodies were monitored, their movements observed, their fertility quietly manipulated. Dust drifts through the beam of torchlight, illuminating a reconstructed Spartan council chamber. Low stone benches, dark wooden pillars, the faint scent of oil lamps soaking into ancient grain. Here critical decisions were made. Here men in red cloaks whispered about population ratios, agricultural yields, and rumors of resistance. Not once in any surviving text is compassion mentioned. What the Greeks praised as stability, the narrator says, was maintained through relentless pressure. What they admired as discipline was purchased with the lives of people whose names were never carved into marble. And in the spaces where historical records fall silent, archaeology steps in. At one excavation site near ancient Helot settlement ruins, researchers uncovered a series of clay figurines, small, roughly shaped, depicting women holding infants. Most were broken intentionally. Scorch marks along their edges suggested ritual burning. One shard bore a scratched symbol interpreted by some scholars as a crude plea for protection, an appeal to any deity that might listen. These artifacts, the narrator notes, likely belonged to Helot women who sought solace where words could not reach. Their prayers were pressed into clay because speaking them aloud could invite punishment. Behind all of this, every whispered decree, every hidden act stood Sparta's obsession with strength. To the Spartans, weakness was rot, decay, a threat to the purity of their warrior identity. Anything that undermined that identity was crushed, reshaped, or erased. Thus, Helot women lived under the constant weight of 2 powers, the physical force of the Spartan state and the psychological force of being considered necessary, but unworthy, vital, but despised. The narrator pauses, a slow exhale. The torchlit stone walls fade into darkness, and then he speaks again. To grasp the full gravity of what was done to Helot women, we must now step deeper, not into the open records of Sparta's public laws, but into the quiet spaces their leaders never intended the world to see. The halls where night rituals unfolded. The fields where footsteps in the dark meant more than hunger. The chambers where Spartan youths were shaped and where Helot women were unmade. What comes next, he warns, is the story hidden beneath the story. The part carved out of history like a wound sealed with stone. The part Sparta tried hardest to bury. The torchlight returns slowly as if coaxed out of the darkness by unseen hands. The chamber we left behind in the cold, open stretches outward into a wider world. Fields, barracks, thresholds where dust and dread cling to every surface. The narrator speaks not with haste, but with the heavy precision of someone opening an archive sealed by centuries. He begins not with a king nor an ephor, but with a woman. Her name is Myrrine, 25 years old. born in a low valley carved by river stones and watched over by olive trees bowed by the wind. Her hands bear the quiet scars of agricultural labor, and her voice, though soft, carries the memory of songs she learned from a grandmother who once believed things might change. Myrrine's days begin before dawn. She steps onto soil still crusted with night frost, the smell of damp earth rising like a warning. Her fingers brush wheat heads as she walks, listening to the distant clatter of Spartan shields at the training grounds. The rhythm is unmistakable, stern metallic pounding like an enforced heartbeat across the land. Her 5-year-old son, Thyrsos, clings to her linen dress, drowsy from sleep. She kneels, tying a strip of fabric around his wrist so he won't wander too far as she works. Her breath forms small clouds in the air. The sky is still pale, the sun not yet risen. Somewhere in the distance, a horn sounds deep hollow, echoing across fields and water. Myrrine flinches. Helots flinch at every sound that isn't wind or birdsong. The narrator draws us deeper. We follow Myrrine through a long morning that feels stretched thin by fear. Every motion carries a quiet tension, glancing over her shoulder, tensing at footsteps, holding breath, when she sees red cloaks on the ridge above the valley. But the Spartans do not come for her today. Today they move elsewhere, toward another village, toward another woman. Her name, the narrator tells us, was Kleio, 19 years old, married for only 2 summers. Her husband worked as a cooper, shaping barrels for storing Spartan rations. His hands smelled of resin and sawdust, his voice gentle, marked by the cadence of someone who knew how to speak around overseers without attracting notice. Kleio remembers this the way someone remembers a once warm hearth, faint, distant, fading, because he never came home from a collection assignment 3 months ago. No explanation, no body, only silence. She sleeps alone now in a hut whose walls creak when the night wind moves through the reeds. She wraps herself in rough linen to keep the cold from her bones, the smell of straw lingering in her hair. Some nights she cannot sleep at all. She lies awake listening for footsteps, dreading them, praying not to hear them. But this morning the footsteps come, slow, measured, accompanied by the rustle of red cloaks. A Spartan overseer appears at the entrance of her hut torchlight, spilling around him in a halo of smoke. His expression is carved from the same material as every Spartan official, chiseled, emotionless, unreadable. He does not raise his voice. He doesn't need to. Kleio, he says her name sounding like a command. Stan. She rises with trembling legs. Her heartbeat echoes in her ears, drowning the faint crackle of the torch. She knows better than to ask why he is here. Questions are punishable. Hesitation is punishable. Tears, if seen, can be punished. The overseer steps aside. Behind him stands a Spartan youth, 15, maybe 16, clad in a simple tunic. His hair is shorn short in the Agoge style. His face is still round with adolescence, but his posture tries to imitate the granite rigidity of the men around him. This is not his choice, not entirely. He is as bound by Spartan law as she is by Helot servitude. The decree is silent but understood. Kleio is to accompany them. Her throat tightens. She grips the edge of her shawl, the coarse threads scratching her palms. The overseer turns without another word and begins to walk. The youth lingers, meeting her eyes for a brief second, not out of compassion, but uncertainty. He had been told she would obey. She does. She gathers her shawl around her shoulders, steps into the chill morning air, and follows them down the narrow dirt path leading toward the training barracks. Her footsteps are barely audible against the gravel. The Spartans' footsteps are thunder. The narrator shifts focus to a vantage point overlooking the valley. Red cloaks dot the ridge like drops of paint on pale stone. Their movements are coordinated, deliberate. Every patrol, every inspection, every ritual. Nothing is arbitrary. He reveals that Kleio's village had been flagged for demographic imbalance, a quiet term found on a fragmentary administrative tablet recovered from the outskirts of ancient Sparta. The markings, though eroded, contain enough to decipher 3 adult males lost, fertile women without issue to be reviewed, cold, bureaucratic, inhuman. It is in these records, the narrator says, that the true scale of policy emerges not through sensational stories, but through lines of administration carved in clay by hands that never question the morality behind them. The scene widens. We see the training grounds where the dust rises in pale columns beneath the feet of Spartan boys undergoing drills. The smell of sweat mixes with the scent of trampled grass and oiled leather. The overseers bark commands, sharp clipped syllables that crack the air like snapped twigs. This is where Kleio is taken. The entrance to the grounds is guarded by 2 men with spears crossed. When they see the overseer approaching, they step aside. Kleio hesitates for half a breath. The The youth looks back at her eyes, narrowing slightly, waiting to see if she will falter. She does not. Inside, shadows cling to the edges of the barracks. Rows of spears lean against a wall, metal tips catching flickers of sunlight. The ground is uneven, churned by countless drills. She recognizes the scent of iron sweat and something else, something sharp and foreign, like the smell of fear made physical. The overseer gestures toward a stone structure near the perimeter. His voice is low. Inside, she obeys. A cold draft snakes across her ankles as she steps into the chamber. The doorframe is narrow, the stone rough beneath her fingertips. The inside is dim, illuminated only by a single torch mounted near the far wall. The flame crackles softly, casting long shadows that stretch and shrink with every shift of air. The youth follows her in. The door closes behind them. The overseer remains outside. The silence inside the chamber is suffocating, thick, heavy, settling over her like a weighted cloak. The boy stands stiffly, fingers twitching at his sides. His breathing is audible, shallow, uneven. Not out of fear, but conflict. This ritual is part of his training, one of the unspoken tasks assigned to select youths, to test discipline, obedience, and detachment. The narrator's voice slows, emphasizing each detail. This is how systems function, he says. Not with loud proclamations, but with quiet expectations. Kleio stands motionless. Her hands tremble. Her breathing quickens. And for a moment, just one, the youth's expression softens. The internal war flickers across his face, the remnants of a boy against the forging of a Spartan. He takes one step forward. His shadow envelops hers, merging into a single, trembling silhouette on the wall. Outside footsteps pass by. Overseers. Soldiers. No one stops. No one questions. Because nothing here is unusual. Nothing here is considered wrong. The torch crackles. Kleio's breath catches. And in the silence, the narrator tells us, every Helot woman lived knowing that a single knock, a single command could decide the shape of her future. And that her voice, her wishes, her grief, none of it mattered to the machinery of the Spartan state. The narrative shifts again back to Myrrine. She has finished binding bundles of wheat when she notices something in the distance, a plume of dust rising near the road leading to her village. Her heart skips. She scans the horizon. 2 Spartan patrols, moving quickly, not toward Kleio's village, toward hers. Thersos tugs at her dress. Mother? She forces a thin smile, brushing his hair back, but her hands are cold. The dust cloud grows. Footsteps echo. She whispers, "Stay behind me, do not speak." The patrol reaches the fields. 6 Spartan warriors approach, shields slung on their backs, spears upright. The leader steps forward, his cloak rippling slightly in the morning wind. His eyes sweep across the workers, assessing, measuring, calculating. Then he points, at Myrrine. Her blood turns to ice. Thersos tightens his grip on her dress. The leader's voice is calm. "You come." Myrrine swallows every instinct urging her to flee, but she cannot. Running would doom her son. Running would doom her neighbors. Running would end in death. She presses a kiss to Thersos' hair. "Stay with Aunt Doria," she whispers. Her voice cracks. The boy's eyes fill, but he obeys. The Spartans escort Myrrine down the narrow path toward the river, their footsteps pounding like distant thunder. The sun finally crests the hills, casting long, cold shadows ahead of them. Myrrine keeps her head low, but not low enough to hide the fear trembling through her. What awaits her, she does not know. Only that this today changes everything. And somewhere in a sealed chamber, Kleio stands frozen in torchlight, her fate already tightening around her like a slowly closing fist. The path Myrrine is forced down winds past fields lined with low stone walls. The morning wind tugs at her hair, carrying with it the scents of river mud and crushed grass. The Spartans walk ahead and behind her, forming a moving cage of red cloaks. Their silence is unnerving, measured stoic, as if escorting her is merely a logistical duty, rather than a decision that will reshape the rest of her life. The narrator observes that this practice, summoning Helot women for assessment, was never recorded openly. It slipped through the cracks of public law into the realm of ritual expectation concealed behind euphemisms, like population regulation or field compliance. They reach a low structure near the riverbank, a stone outpost partially sunken into the earth, its doorway dark like a mouth carved into the hillside. Myrrine stops, breath unsteady, feeling the cold air rising from within. The Spartans do not touch her. They do not need to. One gesture toward the opening is enough. She enters. Inside, the air is colder, thick with the smell of damp stone and extinguished torches. The only light filters in from the doorway behind her, stretching long shadows across the floor. She stands for several heartbeats, her pulse loud in her ears. Then she sees him. A Spartan elder, an ephor by his cloak markings, sits at a wooden table. On the table, clay tablets each marked with symbols that resemble household tallies or agricultural records. But one tablet, one set aside from the rest, bears the faint outline of a woman's figure etched in the corner. Myrrine's stomach tightens. The ephor lifts his gaze. "You are Myrrine," he states, not asking. She nods. "You have one child?" "Yes." Her voice is barely audible. "No husband." Her breath falters. "He died during..." He raises a hand. She stops speaking. His eyes narrow slightly as if assessing not her words but her usefulness. The narrator explains Sparta's deepest cruelties did not shout. They reviewed cataloged selected. A second figure emerges from the shadows behind the table, a Spartan youth older than the one with Kleio, perhaps 17 or 18. His posture is rigid, trained, conditioned to obey. His expression is unreadable, a mask carved through years of discipline. The ephor scribbles something onto a clay tablet with a stylus. Then he speaks a phrase Myrrine has never heard before, one that chills her marrow. "Bring her forward." The youth steps toward her. Her breath trembles. The narrator lets the moment hang, the torchless chamber pressing inward with suffocating weight. While Myrrine is sealed inside that stone outpost, another story unfolds miles away, one that reveals the psychological machinery behind these practices. The narrator pulls us into the perspective of Damon, a Spartan boy of 14. He is undergoing his second year in the Agoge, the brutal state-run program that shapes all Spartan males. Damon rises before dawn each day to the sound of overseers striking staffs against bronze shields. He eats sparingly watery porridge crusts of bread, forcing himself not to flinch at the cold that seeps into his bones. He trains with other boys his age, learning to fight, to endure pain, to silence fear. But the training goes beyond physical hardship. It teaches him to detach, to suppress softness, to perform duty without question. Today, Damon is instructed to accompany two older youths on patrol. They move silently across the landscape, skirting Helot huts, observing without speaking. Damon watches a Helot mother draw water from a well, her child clutching her hip. He watches a group of men repairing a plow in tense silence. He watches shadows of exhaustion etched into every face. And then he watches as an overseer pulls one of the men aside, inspects him, and marks a symbol on a wax tablet. Damon does not ask what the symbol means. He already knows. Everyone in the Agoge knows. The symbol means the man is excess strength, potential danger, possible target. The narrator speaks Sparta conditioned its youths not only to fight wars but to sustain internal domination. Later, as Damon walks past the training grounds, he hears something faint muffled a sound like stifled breath. He pauses near the stone chamber we saw with Kleio. The overseer's shadows ripple against the wall. Damon does not approach. He does not ask. He has learned not to. This is the world he is being shaped into, one where silence is strength and empathy is an obstruction to be cut away. Back in the river outpost, Myrrine stands motionless before the ephor. The youth who stepped toward her now stands only a few hand-widths away. His breath quivers not with fear, but with the strain of obedience. The ephor's voice is low-controlled. "The state assigns roles," he says, and roles are fulfilled. Myrrine's breath hitches. She feels the cold stone beneath her feet, the thin fabric of her dress clinging to her skin from nervous sweat. She wants to speak, to plead, but her tongue feels heavy, her throat constricted. The ephor marks another line on his clay tablet. "You will comply," he says, not a threat, a statement of the natural order. Outside the chamber, the Spartans wait. The sound of their shifting armor echoes faintly, creaking leather metal, brushing metal hushed breaths through discipline-hardened lungs. Myrrine closes her eyes. The torchless chamber seems to shrink around her. The narrator's voice softens but grows darker. Helot women were not only controlled, they were absorbed into Sparta's machinery, pressed into roles that erased their humanity in service of the state's survival. As dusk settles over the valley, the dust of the training grounds drifts through the air like ash. We return to Kleio, still in the chamber with the younger youth. The torchlight has burned low, its flame smaller now, flickering weakly as though exhausted by what it has witnessed. The youth stands near the wall, breathing heavily. His knuckles are white around the staff he no longer remembers holding. Kleio sits against the cold stone forearms, wrapped around herself, eyes distant. Is she crying? The shadows make it impossible to tell. Her breath is unsteady but quiet as Helot women are taught to be. The door opens. The overseer reappears. He surveys the chamber with a glance, efficient, emotionless. To the youth, he says, "Report." The boy stiffens. His voice is thin, trembling beneath the surface, but forced into steadiness. He offers a curt description, clinical, stripped of emotion, framed as a test of discipline. The overseer nods. He is satisfied. Kleio does not speak, not because she is silenced though she is, but because words have no place in a room ruled by power and ritual. She stands when told, she walks when commanded, and when she exits into the fading daylight, she does so with the quiet gait of someone who has just lost a piece of herself she will never reclaim. The narrator emphasizes, Sparta did not need whips to break Helot women. It used inevitability. Night falls fully now, settling over the valley like a dark shroud. Myrrine is escorted back to her village. The stars are sharp points of cold light overhead. Thersos runs to her the moment she appears at the edge of the path, wrapping his small arms around her waist. Her hands tremble as she holds him. She does not tell him what happened in the outpost. She does not tell anyone. But her eyes, once bright with cautious resilience, now carry a deeper shadow. A new weight. A quiet, heavy dread of what comes next. For the ephors tablet will be filed, the selection recorded, the follow-up ordered. And the youth chosen for her, whichever youth the state assigns, will come eventually. Not today, not tomorrow, but soon. The narrator speaks slowly. This is how cruelty becomes normal, not through spectacle, but through scheduling. Meanwhile, Damon returns to the barracks and lies awake on his straw pallet. The sounds of the night drift in the rustle of cloaks being folded, the distant murmur of overseers discussing assignments. The faint ring of metal as armor is set aside. But it is the muffled sob he heard earlier, the sound from Kleio's chamber, that refuses to leave his mind. He tries to swallow it down, to forget, to mold himself into the hardened shape expected of him. But the sound lingers, and for the first time he wonders whether strength and cruelty might not be the same thing. He closes his eyes. Sleep eludes him. Days pass. Kleio avoids the training grounds entirely, now staying close to her hut, moving quietly, her eyes never lifting from the ground. She speaks to no one except when necessary. She wakes in the night with her hands clenched so tightly the nails leave marks in her palms. Myrrine continues her work in the fields, but her movements are slower now. She watches Thersos, constantly unable to shake the fear that Spartans might take more than just her time, her body, her autonomy. Damon keeps training running drills, striking practice dummies, learning to suppress empathy. But something inside him resists fully hardening. He looks at Helot women differently now, not as shadows passing at the periphery, but as people shaped by the weight of fear he has only glimpsed. And deep within Sparta itself, beneath layers of stone and secrecy, a chamber waits. A chamber the narrator hints at but does not yet reveal. A chamber connected to the rituals described. A chamber tied to the fate of Helot women. A chamber whose discovery will unravel everything we think we know. The narrator's voice drops to a quiet rumble. The system of oppression was not random. It had a center, a location, a purpose deliberately hidden from the world. The screen fades to darkness. A final whisper before part 4 closes. And when that hidden place is uncovered, the truth becomes impossible to forget. The narrator's voice returns over a slow pan across the ruins of ancient Sparta, charred stones, broken foundations, fragments of walls half swallowed by earth. Wind sweeps dust through the cracks, carrying the faint smell of cold soil and old ash. He tells us that what comes next was never meant to be uncovered. It began with an excavation near the old training grounds, where archaeologists found a collapsed section of stone flooring beneath the remnants of a long rectangular barracks. At first they assumed it was merely part of a storage cellar, but then they noticed something. The stones were arranged in a distinctly unnatural pattern, forming a hollow beneath them. A sealed chamber, hidden directly beneath the Agoge. The floor was carefully removed. Dust billowed up in a pale plume, and the smell that rose from the opening was dense and stale, like ancient air that had been locked away for millennia. Inside the chamber was narrow and long, lit only by the archaeologists' lamps. Carved into the walls were faint grooves, patterns scratched into the stone with deliberate, repetitive movements. The shapes were not decorative. They were not Greek letters. They were marks. Marks repeating again and again low along the wall at the height of a kneeling person. And then they found the panel, a slab of stone slightly darker than the surrounding walls positioned at the far end of the chamber. When the dust was brushed away, a carving emerged. The lines were shallow but unmistakable, drawn by someone whose hand was steady even under duress. The narrator speaks slowly, each word heavy. It depicted a Helot woman, her head bowed, her hands bound behind her. A Spartan youth standing behind her, his posture stiff with ritualized duty. But that was not the darkest part. Beside the figures, etched in smaller, tighter strokes, as if the carver feared being discovered, was a second image, an ephor-seated stylus in hand marking a tablet. Recording. Approving. The chamber was not a prison nor a shrine. It was an administrative chamber, a place where Helot women were brought for assessment. where Spartan youths were observed as part of their training, where elder officials recorded compliance on clay tablets. The narrator explains voice nearly a whisper. This chamber was the missing link, the physical proof that the rituals inflicted on Helot women were not isolated acts of cruelty. They were institutional, systematic, overseen. In the corner of the chamber, archaeologists found a final object, a broken piece of pottery with markings so faint they could barely be seen under lamplight. But once magnified, the scratches formed a single phrase in archaic Dorian dialect. Let no record reach daylight. The narrator pauses. Breath silence dust. What the Spartans did in darkness, he says, was not only violence. It was concealment, deliberate, methodical, calculated to die with them. The torches fade, the chamber darkens, and history stands exposed. The camera drifts slowly across the excavated chamber one last time. Dust hangs in the air like suspended breath, shimmering faintly in the archaeologist's lamp beams. The walls, etched with marks left by trembling hands centuries ago, seem to pulse with a quiet sorrow. The narrator's voice emerges as a low echo shaped by reverence rather than analysis. He tells us that history often preserves the conqueror's victories, the warrior's discipline, the empire's pride. But beneath those layers lie the stories that power tried hardest to erase, the stories that whisper through cracked stones and broken pottery, refusing to remain silent. The Helot women lived in the margins of ancient Greece, their names rarely recorded, their memories scattered like ash. Yet their suffering shaped Sparta more profoundly than any battlefield triumph. Their labor sustained the state, their fear maintained its hierarchy, their bodies became tools in the machinery of Spartan survival, and still they endured. The narrator reflects on Myrrine, Kleio, and the countless unnamed women whose lives were defined by dread and silenced by decree. Their stories were not written by poets or carved onto monuments, but they left traces, grooves in hidden walls, shards of clay, fragments of ritual that escaped destruction by chance alone. He speaks quietly. Civilizations fall not only because of enemies beyond their borders, but because of the truths they bury within themselves. Sparta saw absolute control, absolute discipline, absolute silence. But silence is never absolute. Over time, stones shift, chambers collapse, dust settles in new patterns, and when those layers are peeled back, what remains is not the glory of red cloaks marching in formation, but the shadows of the people who suffered beneath them. The narrator guides us into a final reflection, one that feels heavy, timeless. Power is temporary, dominance fades, fear erodes, but memory, no matter how deeply buried, waits. The Helot women did not leave written records, they left echoes, echoes that drift through cracked foundations, echoes that tremble in the marks carved into secret walls, echoes that rise centuries later when the earth gives up its secrets. And in those echoes, their names forgotten by their captors are carried forward by history itself. The camera fades to darkness. A single line appears whispered by the narrator. Even when the world refuses to listen, the stones remember.